Hi, listeners. This is a heads up that we will be talking about suicide. I thought you should know. Fill to capacity, where heart, grit, and irreverent humor collide. A podcast for people too stubborn to quit and too creative not to make a difference. Hi, I'm Pat Benincasa, and welcome back to Fill to Capacity. Today's episode, Kris Frykman, Melding Materials and Emotions in Art. I am thrilled to have the very talented Kris Frykman here. Kris is an accomplished artist, educator, and seasoned art therapist. She is a remarkably versatile and skilled professional, blending creativity, empathy, and leadership. She leads art therapy workshops at the Suicide Survivors Club. She actively guides and inspires students as a faculty advisor and instructor at Metropolitan State University. And as a working artist, her passion for art goes beyond her commissioned works to getting grants for community art initiatives. Well, Kris, it's so nice to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you, Pat. It's a privilege to be on your podcast. And hello, listeners. Wow, what an introduction. Oof.
Okay, now we're ready, as you would say, to rock and roll.
Absolutely.
So, Kris, your creativity seems to thrive in multiple arenas, from art making and installations to teaching, writing, and leading art therapy workshops. Could you share how you navigate this multifaceted creative journey of yours?
It's a blessing to meld all of my passions together and have platforms where I'm able to offer, whether it's guidance to students or guidance for participants that show up for self-care and healing in an art therapy workshop, and whether it be writing that I'm pursuing or artwork, it's something that you would just align with your passion. So for 11 years, I was a K through 12 art teacher. Prior to that, receiving my art degree. And as you know, with women in the arts early on, it was slim picking, so to speak. So when I aligned to loving welding and foundry work, of course, you're the only woman in the stratosphere of men banging away and showing you how it's done. So it was just, you roll up your sleeves and you join the Rosie Riveter kind of modality and game on.
Wait a minute now. I got to interrupt you because in the context of what you just said, I understand your professor asked you to teach students how to weld. Is that correct?
That is correct. And which was a real kick in the sense of also helping out undergraduate students. And I was an undergraduate student at the time, just showing them how to create a mold in foundry. It was a privilege to be trusted by the professors. And as you know, being an instructor yourself, it is something that we remember our own instructors, professors that have influenced us, motivated us. And it's the privilege that we can give back to others. So it was truly something I'll never forget. It's very empowering. And I don't know about you, Pat, but on the home front, pursuing art wasn't necessarily, let's just say, there wasn't support on that end. It was slow in coming. Nobody else in the family was choosing that. And when you have someone in business, that's the mentality. Only way to make money is for you to pursue this route, not this route. So, but you just follow the thread.
I agree with you. When we were coming up, women weren't really that encouraged. And I can remember in my undergrad, I had one professor who would only make eye contact with the male students. And if we talk about that today, I think people would gasp and say no. But there was a time when women, and it's not that long ago, that we
Right,
had
right.
to work our way into doing different art mediums. Well, thank you, Kris, for that context. At this point, I'd like to move towards art therapy, and I'd like to give listeners a brief Cliff Notes version about art therapy. Art therapy merges the creative process of making art with psychological theory and practice. It's rooted in the early 20th century, and it gained momentum from the insights of Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, who recognized art's power in expressing the human psyche. Then, after World War II, the field expanded significantly, reflecting a growing public interest in mental health. So, coming full circle back to what you do, Kris, how does being an artist affect your art therapy work, especially in encouraging others towards self expression?
You acknowledge that key aspect of art being therapeutic in the sense it is all about the expression, taking trauma from within and giving it a platform for coming out. And there's so much manifesting for participants that come to a workshop. They are there to embrace in a step-by-step process that can create a forum for healing. It doesn't replace one-to-one therapy by any means. However, as you know, the neurotransmitters in our brain are influenced. There's a shift that manifests when you give someone art materials, a non-threatening material such as cutting out collage from magazines. It's very accessible, something that people can do outside of a workshop and continue on their own. It is a way for when you offer guided steps for participants in a workshop to engage in intentional creation. What happens is that visual symbols manifest, whether they're aware of it or not. Once the participants are able to talk about what they've created and others get to witness that process, what happens is a lot of times ahas kind of just naturally occur where someone might say, oh, I didn't realize this is how I haven't talked about this before.
Mm-hmm.
And it's showing up right on my page here. Or someone else might say, can you tell me a little bit more about what you created here in the center of your collage? And usually something that's in the center is central to that, what's happening in the psyche of that person. So it is a real privilege to set a safe space for healing to manifest. And one of the techniques that I employ, if it's on Zoom, I invite people to have something that brings them joy, to set it next to them in front of their computer so that as they're working, and sometimes I like to have calm music in the background too, so it's more multimodal, calms the central nervous system down. And that way it is a self-grounding technique. If one is feeling a little overwhelmed, they have their object of joy next to them. And I oftentimes will have flowers around me or a candle lit just as a way to model that. In in-person groups, the forum is creating a safe space, giving directives that all emotions are welcome. I usually bring everybody has their own individual packets of Kleenex.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have packets of decaffeinated green tea so that they can mindfully infuse the antioxidants, take that with them for self-grounding after the workshop. But the key thing for me is creating safe forum where people feel safe in sharing their journey and their traumas. As you know, I've been working with the Suicide Survivor Club, and it is an organization that is focused on reducing the stigma of suicide and providing resources and tools for survivors, those that have experienced loss, family loss, death by suicide, and practice presenting safe messaging, such as to create a reduction in reducing stigma. The term commit is no longer in the vernacular. It is died by suicide or something to the effect that mental health challenges was the
Yeah.
cause of the death. And so by mirroring the conversation back to everybody you know, pretty much, it starts that shift, that ripple effect, and
Hmm.
inviting people into a conversation that they might otherwise not feel comfortable talking about, but it's necessary.
You really raise an important nuance. We are our words. We are our language. And
Mhm.
just to take that phraseology, commit suicide, and stop it, because that it's almost damning or accusatory in the nature of the word commit. So,
Yes, it is.
yeah,
And so that's why it is important to interrupt the flow of someone's conversation and just have a educational moment and
yeah.
just say that the vernacular is died by or mental health challenges got the best of this person. And, people go through a dark night of the soul. And we have many reasons for that in our society right now, where there is a cultural manifestation of trauma that we've survived in many ways, even though COVID is still underway. It has impacted the globe and has invited isolation, and people are feeling, how do I process my overwhelm or all of my intense emotions? And by having resources such as tools for art as a therapeutic modality can be very beneficial for anyone that is needing some emotional grounding.
I was going to ask you what an art therapy session would look like, but you've kind of laid that out. I got to ask this question. You
Mhm.
must get people that come into this art therapy session saying, "I don't have any artistic talent. I don't know what I'm doing here. Am I supposed to know what, that kind of concern?" You got two things going. One, self-consciousness, like, "Well, I'm not an artist." How do you deal with that? And then you did talk about making people comfortable to express
Mhm.
themselves and talk about what it is they're making. But how do you get them in the beginning not to be self-conscious and, "I'm not an artist. What do I do?"
That's a great question, Pat. One that I've experienced in the classroom as well. And I know you have, I'm sure, in your experiences
Yeah.
teaching K through 12. What I do is invite, it's all by invitation and just saying, while everybody's permitted, just be yourself. You're here to take care of yourself and nobody else. That's the role. To create a safe space is just to transfer power back to the
Mhm.
person that's feeling powerless. And one of the things, I'll set up tables where there are supplies available to someone that's chosen to show up for self care. Say, these are the tools that we'll be having the opportunity to use today. Cool thing here, there are many cool things, of course, is you're not alone. Look around you. We start with brief introductions and kind of go through the safety protocol while you are here, and then list the rules. Are there anything else that anybody in this group would like to add to that, so that you are furthering empowering someone to participate in the rulemaking? Of course, with any session, 2 hours, and if someone needs to use the bathroom, you just
Yeah.
kind of direct, these are the areas that you take care of yourself. Or if you need to debrief, something should be a trigger. We are going to, practice a grounding technique. I often begin with a a breathing exercise, inviting participants, if they feel comfortable, to practice it. Nobody is required. So if they just choose to sit there and be witness to everybody else, that is their choice. But if they choose to engage, I just really emphasize the non-threatening approach. There's no wrong way to do this. Your process may be similar, the process, ripping or gluing and positioning or overlapping imagery and actually adding words to the collage if you feel like it. So it's all about choice and saying the emphasis is not on the end product, it is about the process. And then you will be invited to talk about it again, your choice. And by the end, what I found is those that have been reticent about speaking up realize when someone takes that bravery mic, so to speak, and chooses to open up, that it is, oh, I can see myself in their story. I can do this. I can do this. And if puddles of tears seem to manifest during that, that's cool. We talk about you have your Kleenex tissue in front of you, so no one feels obligated to take care of anybody else here. And that way, no one's going to be passing a tissue to you. You get to choose if that's what you want. What has happened sometimes in a therapy session or a therapeutic session is when someone hands someone a tissue, it's like saying, stop that. And if they need to just release, well, so be it. And so by just allowing that to happen and say, I see you, I witness you, I feel the pain, it's good to let it out. And that's part of the reason why they are there. And there's usually a protocol if someone is just freshly been traumatized. Yes, they do some one-on-one. And when they're ready to participate in a support group or a supportive 2-hour workshop, then that would be ideal.
You touched on this kind of global stress levels for a lot of reasons. There's so much going on in the world right now, post-COVID, the wars that are happening, political divides. So there's a lot swirling around us. I want to shift here. We're discussing art therapy in a professional setting. Could you suggest ways for individuals to practice art therapy at home to relieve stress? For example, would keeping a doodle journal help somebody? What other activities would you recommend?
That's great. Yes, there's research that shows just one can definitely have a doodle journal, and by doodling can be a self-regulating technique to just stay focused. It just giving your hand opportunity to just go off on its own unconsciously to create a doodle. And that's actually kind of fun in many ways because then you can see pictures in the doodles and then take it from there if you choose to. But it is a way to help somebody self-regulate and just calm their central nervous system down. And if you combine that with focusing on your breath and staying present for a lot of people is hard. People are seeking tools, resources. There are platforms like Calm, as an example, where you can get an app and there are guided meditations that are offered if one is willing to lean into that. That can be very helpful. On a personal note, when I was first practicing listening to body scans and breathing techniques, and I was finding I was in this was a long, long time ago, but I was feeling irritable at the tape or the CD because I was thinking, I'm not there yet. I was feeling agitated by the tape. So I share that only because someone's just starting out and thinking, everybody says, focus on the breath. And I'm tired of focusing on the breath. It just takes practice and even focusing or thinking about your favorite color to bring you back to a calm center. Do what's right for you.
Yeah, I'd like to go in a different direction. As working artists, we're constantly immersed in our creative practice. Now, aside from the professional aspects, do you use your art and writing as a way to relieve stress or as a way to understand the world?
That's a great question, Pat. I know if I use my art to relieve stress, I use it as a form of just being able to express myself. It's
Okay.
an expression of sometimes of what I guess, what I'm thinking or feeling, an interpretation of what might be happening in the world. Everything you create, as you know, is personal. It is like a mini memoir in a way. When you put your work out, it's like you sent a baby into the world, so to speak. So I know there are two purposes for art. Of course, you can manifest your art for the purpose of stress relief, and the outcome could be that it is a piece of art. But if you are doing pure expressive stress relief, it is about the process and not the
Mm-hmm.
product. I think there's two different sets of purposes for one creating. So,
Well, in a sense, this kind of leads to a backdoor truth in our conversation, and that's about the joy found in the act of creating or making. Now, sometimes I can get so engrossed in tasks, deadlines, or self imposed expectations about how a painting should look that it starts to sap the joy out of my work. And when that joy fades, I'm stressed. Now, listeners, has this ever happened to you? You get so hell bent on doing something that you forget why you're doing it and the joy it brings you? So, Kris, in your creative process, how do you maintain or rediscover the joy of making, especially under pressure of deadlines? How do you do it?
whew, boy, yes, you speak my language, Pat, and everybody else out there that are creative souls. When you are in the process, it's a blast for the most part, where you're really in the zone creating and you feel one with whatever it is that you're creating. You feel maximize joy. But yes, you get to that platform where you're stuck, or you just need to walk away and come back at a later date. And sometimes when you come back at a later date, you just want to redo the whole darn thing
Yeah.
because you know there's something to be said about the flow, staying with it because you're executing one style and mine can shift. If I'm in a different mood, I'm going to make different marks on a painting as an example, or with a sculpture, perhaps the shape or form of that sculpture could shift by that. But to your point, to your question, so I was a couple years ago, the beginning of COVID, I decided I love working with driftwood, and I love the idea of having driftwood that's taken out of context from its original thriving livelihood from being a tree to having spent a quality time in a river or a body of water to have transformed its look, and then taking it from one location, transporting it to a new location, and then constructing pieces of driftwood in varying lengths. So it has somewhere like a staccato effect and suspending it through the air. And I had this idea of making driftwood connections in the Solana State Forest, which happens to be in McGrath, Minnesota. So I grabbed my ladder and my materials, rented a cabin. It was just me and all the knots and things I was making with filament. So it looked like the connections were invisible. And so you'd experience the floating driftwood over your head and through the forest and so forth. And yet I was dealing with horse flies and ticks and
Oh,
all of these lovely sentient nasties that were out there nibbling at me while I'm trying to put this together. So there was a point where my joy was how much bug spray can I put on me to,
Yeah.
stay in this focus? And I only had a week to create this, and it was an eighth of a mile long. So it is through perseverance that we get to the other side, is I guess what I'm saying.
I think one of the things bubbling up from our conversation is fluidity, being
Mm,
fluid. And that means that we can dip into all sides of ourselves. So for you, you can dip into being the instructor, teaching, you can go to art therapy, you come back, you do your work. Sometimes people don't give themselves permission to be fluid.
mhm.
Sometimes people think, well, I do this one thing, this is what I'm supposed to do. And for those people, they like to compartmentalize. And I know because I did that early on in my life. I would compartmentalize everything. As I've gotten older, I don't know where the compartments went, but I think they kind of dissolved. You know, it's more a question of fluidity and allowing ourselves to be fluid, to allow ourselves to express what we're feeling. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think for many people, identifying being fluid in one's areas of passions could be simply a love for creating a new dish, something that they've cooked up, and gardening as an example,
Mm-hmm.
and having maybe, their grandparents. Those could be their fluidity. So I don't think it is necessarily having to be job specific, but it just happens to be for me and for you and many of the listeners out there probably too, where I see intersectionality in the things that I'm doing. They're
Yes.
creative and empowering, and passing the empowerment baton to people that I have the privilege of getting to know and work with, and or for someone that's choosing to purchase some of my work, as an example. It is just nice to have that intersection because for me, it just fortifies my spirit. I feel more congruent being able to do those things.
So let's go back to art therapy for a moment. One of the impressions I get is that when people come into an art therapy situation, they've been traumatized or experienced things that they can't give voice to.
Hmm.
And so they come into that taking art materials and whether they're cutting out collages and putting them together, the idea is that they're finding a way to express themselves, which is really about self healing. Can you share a memorable experience you had with art therapy that significantly helped someone in their journey towards healing or self understanding?
Sure. There is something to be said about how our neurotransmitters work. Actually, with trauma, the verbal side of the brain gets shut down. It's hard to talk about a situation. So, by utilizing symbols and imagery, that can help someone manifest a story that they might not have otherwise been able to manifest. So, this past summer, I had the privilege of being able to speak with and conduct a art workshop for healing purposes at the Suicide Survivor Conference in Glencoe, Minnesota. There was a woman, this was her second time attending this workshop, and the gift of coming multiple times to a kind of a healing art workshop is that every time you go through this guided steps of what was going on in your life before said trauma. How did you respond? And then what have you learned or how have you honored? So, kind of on that level. But this woman, she was excited that I remembered her. And I remember her mom. I remember the tattoos and how she honored her dad and having a specific tattoo or a saying on her arm. And she shared with me while at the cemetery visiting her father's headstone, she met a woman and they shared their stories. Comes to be that their stories were very similar. And next thing she tells this woman, I'm going to a conference. I'd love for you to join me. So this woman introduced this new friend that she met in the cemetery, and they both came together to the workshop. And I had the privilege of working with both of them, and among others. And so you have a real mix, and it's just the gratitude and the hope that collectively gets witnessed when people choose to share mirror their art, hold it up for someone else to witness. And there isn't anybody saying it's good or bad. It is what it is. It is their story. And they get to talk and explain it how they see it. And then if they wish to have feedback, we open it up all within a time parameter when you have a lot of people, if that's the case in a workshop. So everybody has a voice. So that was a key moment. There was a woman in the same workshop who, it was fairly recent. She had lost a nephew and understandably emotive. But by the end, she was so grateful to connect with everybody. And she said, I'm so glad I came. I almost didn't come. And to see that there is hope. Everybody's at a different level.
Yeah.
And years go by and you still are dealing with pain and it hasn't integrated in the body. So you're going to go to self-care opportunities. Hopefully you do. And this woman by the end was made some new friends. It was beautiful to witness. So those are two stories, but there was one that I was thinking about when I volunteered as a support group facilitator and a crisis counselor at the Sexual Violence Center in Minnesota. We had sort of random, someone came to the office with bags of onions and they had a surplus from their farm. So I did say it was random. So here I'm running this support group, and the prior week, someone was saying, they're having a hard time getting their feelings out and crying, and we were making these self-care toolbox. And so I brought the onions down into the workshop and I said, look, we have a bounty of instant tears, and here's how we can make that happen, So what, and everyone went home with onions. And the next week, one woman said, oh, I put my onion in my self-care toolbox and I have it on my living room. So every time I just need a good cry, I open it up and a waft of onion comes out. It was so beautiful. Yeah, that stayed with me. It's a great story.
Oh, yes, it is. And the idea that whatever happens to coax, encourage, support, guide, or just listen, it is about somebody letting go.
Mm-hmm.
Really, I mean, this is about letting go. And to do that, you have to feel safe.
You do.
I mean, you do. And so if you don't have like a close friend to share with or somebody, I think that these workshops offer people a way to get in touch with what they're feeling so that they don't feel so isolated.
And that they are not alone. That's key. One, if you arrive feeling that you're the only one experiencing this depth of pain, you come away knowing, well, there are others feeling this horrific pain too. And it's hard work. It is very hard work,
Yeah.
but you can get to the other side. And for those struggling, resources are always provided at workshops, of course. And you can go to the website suicidesurvivors.com or NAMI, and that's the National Alliance for Mental Illness, which, by the way, the Suicide Survivor Club is affiliated with. So if you ever go on that website and choose to make a donation, it goes right toward the NAMI organization. Yeah, resources are important, but if anyone out there, any of your listeners are out there and they're finding themselves struggling, especially as we come up to the holidays,
Yeah.
I'd like you to put on your phone 988. That's a lifeline number for anyone that you know having suicide ideation, or if you are needing to process how to cope with others that are experiencing this, contact 988. It is free.
Great. Well, Kris, as we wrap up, your stories and insights have highlighted the rich diversity of your experiences in both art and art therapy. Could you share a key insight from your path in art therapy that every aspiring artist or therapist should hear?
Boy, I remember when I was in teaching K through 12 art and the opportunity to facilitate support groups for students that were identified at risk. And that's just a term where, a student might be challenged at home and their energies, excess energy is coming out in a way that's interruptive to a class, or they might have another kind of challenge that they're dealing with. And that was very appealing to me to offer my prep time. It's usually when it would happen. Once a week, I had the opportunity to work with students. They'd come into my small office space and we would get to, and basically it goes down to empowering student how, build a safe space and then to get to what materials you'd like to work with. And we'd set something up. But I decided to do this with other colleagues at the time to get certified as a support group facilitator. And it was through the Minnesota Counselors Certification Program. And that just whet my appetite for, being able to witness the transformative impact can have on students and in the lives of people that choose to,
Yeah.
participate in that. Plus, even in the classrooms, I'm sure you notice this too, where you glean so much from students from their creative work, then how they manifest their expression on paper, on canvas, in a sculpture. You really get to know that student. And this is true for creative writing. Definitely get to know the students. That was part of my process. And then when I decided to work with taller students, I found out their excuses are definitely the same. My dog ate my paper. I digress. I found when I was working initially in college settings that, and still now, that students still need that safe space. I was modeling that all my classes so people could feel comfortable telling me whatever they needed to share it, and I could direct them to the resources, not taking on counselor, of course, but to have that trust factor that we are in this class together. We are a community of learners. We have these goals to meet, and you have to meet me 100%, and I'm going to support you all the way. But these are the tools for your success. So game on, let's do it.
I think that you really hit it, the nail on the head in terms of safe space. Teaching art for many years as I did, there was something so remarkable, almost like daily miracles. Walking into the art studio for a class, you get to know students in a way that
Mhm.
you're not teaching math or chemistry. You get to see their expression on paper, canvas, or what they're building. And it is truly, truly a glimpse of who they are. But all of it hinges on them feeling safe, them feeling respected, and knowing that they can talk to you about anything and it's okay. And I
Mhm.
think you really amplify that whole notion of what is important, safe space, psychologically and physically.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Kris, for presenting your multifaceted creative work and leaving us with a lot to think about. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Pat. It's been a privilege.
And with that said, I would like to leave listeners with this quote: Art is my cure to all this madness, sadness, and loss of belonging in the world, and through it, I'll walk myself home.
Beautiful.
So thank you, listeners, for joining us today. If you enjoyed the podcast, please tell your friends. Thank you. Bye.